So it is another day, and we're here again to discuss the mental obsession, discuss our experience in relation to it, and see if considering some ideas about it might have an impact on how we operate, how we function, and how we interact with one another on a regular basis. And if, in fact, the contention that the disease of addiction is a mental problem is, in fact, true, then this mental problem has been largely overlooked. It's been referenced and talked about, but not looked at as closely as I imagine it could be if it were thought of in terms of the impact that it has on us, in terms of maintaining the obsessive ideas and maintaining ideas that aren't true as being true, and maintaining ideas we don't think we have or shouldn't have, and as a result wonder why we seem to be a victim or feel somewhat caught off guard or at odds with reality and truth on a daily basis, when in fact I would suggest it's impossible to ever be at odds with reality and truth. We're only at odds with what we think about those things. And that internal struggle becomes a very difficult thing to maintain, because as long as I insist on maintaining it, it seems to persist as though I have nothing to do with it. And that's typical addictive behavior, doing the thing that's killing us in the name of thinking it's saving us. So good morning. Gabe and I had a walk yesterday with Laura Alice, and that was, you'd said some things, Gabe, that I want to approach, but I also want to hear what your thoughts were, if you have any lingering notions.
No. Still hacking up my lungs this morning. Getting over some bronchitis. No, yesterday was great. I was just trying to bridge the gap with what we deal in sobriety in the rooms and this discussion, which seems far advanced and far above, but in reality turns out is the exact same discussion. And to try and reach everyday people by doing everyday things, practicing these principles in all our affairs, practicing these solutions, really, these guides. So that's what
principles.
Yeah.
And beginning to realize that principles don't change. They always stay the same. So they're always going to be reliable and dependable and functional and resourceful and useful and helpful, always. And so if that isn't our experience, then it's something we're doing in our thinking about the principles. Again, we think about life as though life is what we think, rather than life is what life is. And we think about it. We are doing that each to our own experience, and we are causing that experience by the choices we make and the approaches we take in relation to the thinking we do about those things. So to your point, Gabe, Bill Wilson, as he wrote the 12 and 12 in the late 50s, he came to realize that emotional sobriety was the ultimate goal of sobriety. It wasn't just being free of alcohol. It was seeing that by being free of alcohol, we could be released from all the difficulties and defects that we had found ourselves seemingly a prey to, that we drank over. The misery and the depression and the lack of ability to have relationships, lack of ability to fend for ourselves in terms of financial matters, et cetera, all the bedevilments. In my experience, those were the things I drank to feel better about. While I didn't do anything about those things, they continued to get worse, while I thought I was getting better at feeling better while I was ignoring those things. And to do that same thing once I've recovered from any addiction, any compulsion, is to miss the fact that that thing always was sourced in an idea, a mental concept. And the mental concept, when it's twisted and diseased, is I'm conflicted, and I think I'm going to overcome the conflict by adding more conflict. I'm going to think from the basis of what's wrong, and I'm going to continue to think that somehow the wrong thinking I'm sourcing it in is going to one day be right. And what I run into is a lot of calamity and all of the bedevilments in sobriety. So Bill's idea of emotional sobriety was in fact sane living. And to his dismay, when he came to this, he thought of this now as, again, the same thing as the idea that you could be free of alcohol, which had a profound effect on the country and the world. And he watched that happen. He watched people respond. But people didn't respond to this concept of emotional sobriety as quickly at all. And it kind of surprised him because he felt it was really the holy grail of the whole point. So we today are starting to talk about it more because my experience is people coming in are younger typically. They don't have the baggage of the worst case drunks that used to be the only ones that seemed to qualify for alcoholism. Way back in the 30s and 40s, people who had never, when there was never a solution before, people had 20 years of drinking history and bankruptcies and failures and divorces and all kinds of wreckage. And today we've got people coming into the rooms at 14 years old who barely had a drink, but recognize there's something going on they want to treat. They want to do something about that condition. So I would suggest that that progress has been an awareness that has made the ultimate awareness of the problem a lot clearer for people. And so it's become more of a common conversation, but I'm not sure it's being looked at in all of its ramifications accurately. And my goal in my sobriety, given that what you're talking about, practicing principles in all of my affairs and principles before personalities, is starting to see that to any degree, I think of principles as something that are flexible and optional and negotiable. I'm thinking thinking is in control of life. I'm thinking thinking is the source of life. I'm thinking thinking is in fact reality and truth. And to use thinking against my own experience by making believe that something is profoundly fundamental to life becomes reality and truth rather than something I'm doing in relation to reality and truth, I begin to undermine my whole capacity to function on any level that would be valuable and useful and helpful to others, despite the fact that I'm doing a lot of things that look like I'm better. I'm helping people. I'm doing things in the name of that, but yet still struggling with some of the depressive tendencies and the impressive reactive tendencies and the impulsive tendencies of that thinking. And then saying, well, because I'm doing these other things, I'm better, and then acting better than I actually feel. And people within sobriety, people within society kill themselves over that kind of thinking, in my experience. It seems to catch them off guard because they think there's nothing they can do about it, and they just give up because they're the ones promoting it. They're not looking at their own involvement in it. And as a result, making believe it has nothing to do with them. And as a result, there's nothing they can do about it. So the ultimate decision is kill the body that does the thinking, rather than begin to see that the self they think they are isn't who they are at all. It's just what they're thinking about their thinking itself. And start to actually requalify and reclarify the whole process so that it brings to our conscious, it brings to the voices that we think about in our brain a conversation that actually aligns with what's happening, rather than continues to promote the idea that I can't really talk about it because it's so abysmal and so difficult and so ugly and so minimal in terms of so loathsome, so hateful, so spiteful, that I think those things are not worthy of mentioning. So, and I've spent enough time doing that, so I'm a fairly good example of the process. And I don't talk about this because I don't do it anymore. I talk about it because I want to get better at talking about it. So those things don't tend to think. So I don't tend to think that the best thing I can do is keep to my seeming self these thoughts and think that by harboring them, I'm going to get better, when in fact, it's always proven to me all I'm doing is making believe I'm better while I'm actually getting worse. So the thing that stuck out yesterday, Gabe, that was wanting to simplify the language, because it seemed like to me that you said that it's too much words, too many words being used to either just when I speak, exactly. But so what my experience has been is that I don't, clearly within AA people talk about the fact that I'm obsessed with the obsession. But I have come to realize that if it's an obsession, it would be a very derogatory experience that I'm having to continue to maintain it in a very spiteful, hateful, loathsome, contemptful experience I'm having, which I don't tend to have that much. I definitely have those times, but those times diminish and dissipate as quickly as I start noticing that if I'm having those experiences, I am doing something in my thinking that is not right, and I'm making believe it's right. And to come to terms with that at any point, I don't need to know what the thought is to be able to notice that all of the thoughts are being contaminated by this. And if my present experience tells me that, and I'm listening to the body language and say, oh, this is telling me, this guidance system, my dashboard is saying, you're up to something that's no good, thinking it's good. You're trying to turn that thing by continuing to maintain it into something good when the basis of it has no basis in reality at all. It's just an idea. So my experience has been that inspiration is a very different thing than obsession, because inspiration can allow focus, but with that focus comes all the intuitive knowledge and the awareness that continues to, as you move in that direction, like an artist, as you move in that direction, it just keeps opening and opening and opening and opening. And the information that is coming is so you can't quantify it. It's not something that can be limited to a few words or a few thoughts, because it's just this magnificent, it's like letters just being thrown into the pot, and then they all start making sense because there's an intuitive awareness that's absolutely secure, stable, knowingness, peace, stillness, all of those things. And I would suggest that's our nature. That's all of our nature. And if it weren't our nature, we would not be so quick to understand that something's wrong. So the wrong might have to be great before we notice it, because we've become so good at denying and thinking that our management style of denial is in fact the progress we've made as humans, when in fact we're going numb to what's happening. And being numb is effectively an argument in favor of not existing. That's what happens when you die or you're in a coma. You're numb. You don't feel things. Feeling those things and recognizing those feelings as guidance systems is really the beginning of waking up to the fact that we've got a beautifully designed body that gives us information all the time as to whether we're acting on behalf of survival or against survival, in favor of survival or not favoring survival, constantly. Rather than see the feelings of bad as something to escape from, which is the typical idea within the idea that I'm the creator of reality, I'm going to deny anything that actually is happening and start to act as though I have nothing to do with it and it's just happening to me, and oh, woe is me, and just tell stories about how tough life is. When in life isn't tough at all, the toughness is coming from the constant barrage of my own interior conversation that I'm creating to give me the impression that there's actually somebody else inside me doing this, which I call myself. And if you listen to people, they will say, well, I, myself, personally, I'm like, all right, you've identified three of you there. So that's schizophrenia. Rather than I. What's the volition? I'm making choices. I make choices. I choose to do things. That choice offers me the freedom to always not choose it, and to feel that I'm compelled, in my experience, tells me that the thought I'm having has no basis. And it creates an immediate sense of struggle, because that thing thinks I'm thinking of it as something that's alive because I think it's real and true and right, and end up maintaining it by making believe that my resistance to admitting what's happening is in fact going to someday prove itself right and give me credit for having finally achieved this thing that I can't possibly do, which is to turn a lie into truth and reality. Something that doesn't exist into something that exists. All reality exists right now. It's just real. If it weren't, if there was some gap, then it wouldn't seem odd to us to feel like nothing's real, to feel like we're disconnected. It would seem normal. That would be natural. So the words, I think your point, Gabe, is that kind of like Jesus talked in parables, he boiled stories down. But if you listen to the stories, which I did during COVID, I went through all of the parables, most of them. They're not all that simple. they're sort of lengthy stories to try to make the point of all the potential complications that can come in the thinking, the immoral ideas, the non-virtuous ideas, all of that stuff, to make a point that when you're actually moral in thinking, when you're actually expressing things accurately, when you're actually operating on the basis of principles, you don't create the conflicts that require parables to explain what they are, because the clarity is immediate, and it doesn't become this thing that we say, well, I can't understand it. As though understanding, again, is the source of our reality, because understanding is a function of thinking. And again, we're trying to reinforce thinking as being the sole source. So it just keeps looping and looping and looping rather than realize there is no real loop. We're just going in circles trying to think that someday this vicious cycle will get us somewhere. And it's really a stationary bike. We're just riding it harder and harder and harder. And even if we had a video screen that showed us in Switzerland riding some path somewhere, we're not there. We're here, we're now, we're doing what we're doing as we're doing it. And the impact of that doing is either seen as something we're doing or as something happening to us. And that division comes from immediately making believe that there is a divisive nature at hand, because I'm trying to make believe my thoughts are truth and reality. Morning, Harry. You may be on mute, Harry.
There we go. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
Morning.
So yes, there's a lot of words, and it's a clearing of sorts to look at it, because as it's discussed in my experience, it grows. But as it's discussed amongst other people, it obviously triggers reactive tendencies to any degree that we're hanging on to those thoughts that we think are reality. It becomes preposterous to imagine something so simple could be, in fact, real and true. And that's really what this discussion is about, is to start socially engaging around these ideas and seeing that we all have ideas that aren't true. They're cultural ideas and all kinds of ideas that we have about death and life and reality, all that stuff. It doesn't mean we can't have them. It means that when we have them and we think they're true, we're creating this inner dialogue that's in conflict, and literally thinking we're having to think about that. We're having a dialogue in our experience rather than simply thinking about our thinking. Thinking about our thinking isn't a dialogue until we think one of those thoughts is real and has a body now and a voice and eyes and ears and blood and substance. And it's just us creating a fantasy of delusion, making believe it's reality. There's nothing else going on. All the thoughts, all of my lies that I keep maintain seem to have a voice of their own. And we talk about it openly as the committee in our head. Often. Like the committee's in full session. And to see if I can do this with one thought is to begin to see doing it with all those thoughts, and just start to see that the goal of a solution is to solve all things that would be related to the problem, rather than one single thing and think that I need to go and find every instance and every time and every place and every person and every conflict somehow in this hidden thing and set off in another mysterious adventure that I can never possibly succeed at. Rather than notice it's just what I'm doing now only, ever. It's what I'm doing now with what I'm thinking that makes the difference in terms of my depression or my inspiration, desperation or inspiration. So that's a lot of words. In relation to your boiling down, Gabe, one of the things we talked about yesterday is that we know more than we think. And that's especially true when all we think we know is what we think. So to think that thinking is the sole source of our knowing is to think, here's something else that's pretty interesting. If we can be thinking things we don't think we're thinking, that's almost a perfect metaphor for knowing things that we have no reason to even understand that we know. if there's that subterranean ability in our own experience to pretend we're not doing what we're doing, it's kind of a metaphor for the fact that reality doesn't seem to be visible. It just seems to be convertible into things that happen. And yet every substructure at every subatomic level, which they keep researching and researching and researching and researching, and everywhere they look, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And Einstein had said that when he started looking at the subatomic level, he felt that he was beginning to look into the face of God, because he started noticing that there was a beautiful order that seemed to be conveyed, that there were things that could be discovered about that order. But the fact that those things aren't discovered by humans doesn't mean those things aren't in perfect order right now for all of us and all things. And that's a pretty profound way to start looking at life and simply concede it's already, we don't need to understand it for it to be in order. Our understanding was not designed to create order in reality. It was to simply express reality. And when we're not disordered in our thinking, it's natural that we do things that are kinder and more generous and less scarce, more abundant, because we're starting to tap and express the nature of reality, which is ultimate abundance, unlimited abundance, love in its essence, always giving, always giving, always giving, never taking. There's nothing to take. So we must already have everything while we're acting as though we don't. We're acting as though we're separate. The one thing we do separately is choose what we think. That's what we each seem to be endowed with.
Make thinking sound like a good thing.
It's certainly designed that way, and the big book says that.
Well, intuition is knowledge without thinking, right?
Right. Well, knowledge beyond reason, which would include thinking and understanding and all of those procedural things.
No.
Morning, Mark.
Morning.
So if that knowledge, let's open on this. If that knowledge is infinite, and it's almost impossible to grasp the infinite within the context of understanding and reason, which is why intuition is beyond knowledge, because it can't be apprehended, it can't be comprehended. So there's no fugitive that we're trying to track down and capture. There's nothing we need to search for. It's here, it's now, it's absolutely the basis of our existence. If that's the case, and we start thinking in that way, we don't need to understand that to be true, to simply consider that if it is true, what would that mean in our experience? And what quickly occurred to me is I'd have a lot less reason to be conflicted in my thinking. It's sort of consideration, I began to realize, was actually a contemplative meditation while my eyes were open. And that seeming idea of all these things happening that I didn't think were happening was really just like a dream. That while I was in it, I thought that I was terrorized by it. But when I woke up from the dream, like any dream or nightmare, it's easy to say, oh, that was just a dream. Boom. If this is the case during our waking hours, which is why Gurdjieff said that humans are the only species sleeping, dreaming they're awake, then our waking hours are in fact evidence by making believe that we're doing things we say we're not doing, thinking things we think we shouldn't be thinking, and as a result, thinking things we're not thinking we're thinking, then we're really choosing to create an environment that is so conflicted and so distracting and so disorienting that it's very hard to take credit for that and say, I'm the one causing this. That's insane. And so there's sort of a sleep state that seems to happen. And I would say it's a hypnotic trance because it operates exactly the way a hypnotist operates. I take a little bit of evidence, a little suggestion, and all of a sudden I think I'm a chicken running around a stage. And then have no memory of being the chicken once I come out of that. Interestingly, just like when we wake from dreams, within a minute, very often, all the clarity seems to vanish. The memory of it is just little spots and pieces. Because it was nothing ever more than thought. Reality isn't thinking. And yet it's complete and whole. It's knowing. It isn't thinking about itself. It doesn't have a self to think about because it knows everything. What would it think about? It already knows. That's the basis. That's our basis. Mind, in the capital sense, is not a brain. Brains think, mind knows. We know as beings, we think as humans. We are as beings, we do as humans. So where do we go with that?
Don't think. I mean,
Well,
when you put it this way, Jack,
yes.
all this God-given free will and creation of man, all you're saying is that why have any of it? Since everything is the way it should be, and reality is, and knowing and intuition is what it is, as soon as you start bringing in free thinking and free will, all that happens is it becomes individual or out of alignment with the reality. And therefore, we go through this life cycle of either trying to get in tune with it or some form of denial or obsession that ultimately is misaligned or destructive. It doesn't sound like a very positive experience to have thinking.
Well, given that my experience is that we've been thinking obsessively so long, we think thinking is only obsessive thinking because we've been doing it and not talking about it. Just like the people thought the horizon was the end of the world because that's how it looked, and everybody agreed, well, that's how it looks, that's how it must be. They didn't talk about the fact that there may be countries beyond that with tropical paradises and tea in China and all kinds of other things to find and explore and benefit from. And my sense is, Les, I mean, you're really on it. We've done it so long, we take for granted that's what thinking is, that it's obsessive. And that's all that it is. And it's not. It's actually a human conduit to express a knowing nature that allows us to do things before we think and be overly, within sobriety, you see this happen where people say, I can't even imagine. I couldn't have imagined all these good things to have happened. My imagination wasn't even enough to consider all these possibilities, and yet they've happened. When we give an inch, we get the whole mile. Rather than give an inch and take the mile, we're given the mile. Because we start to align in the least bit, we start functioning in a way that's dramatically different than this other way where we seem isolated and alone and completely compelled to do the wrong thing. And think life is about just trying to manage it all the time, rather than see the thing we're trying to manage is the thing we're creating by making believe our thinking is in fact reality and truth, rather than simply imagine and thoughts about reality and truth. If I think about you, I'm not really thinking about you. I'm thinking about what I think about you. Same when I'm thinking about me. That isn't me. It's just a thought about me. To think of that as reality is pretty interesting because we're taking fantasy and pretending it's reality. That's clearly insanity. And insanity isn't a far stretch. It doesn't take being completely incapacitated and unable to talk to people and screaming at the sky to actually be functioning on a level well below our capacity as humans, as a species. And I think we've done that extraordinarily well. Very often our big solutions are just 30-year problems in the making. And because the problem isn't immediate, we figure we've saved ourselves again. It's exactly what I did when I drank. Same thing. Feel better for a minute, think we've solved it, but there's a time bomb ticking. It's going to be revealed at a point where I'm going to be if I can't deal with it now, I'm certainly not going to be ready to deal with it when it has built pressure and pressure and pressure and pressure, and mounting problems have surrounded me. Why would I get better? I'm getting worse at dealing with things accurately and honestly.
No, but okay. I don't want to call this a two-edged sword, but first of all, thinking is sometimes limiting, and therefore it's not knowing and it's not all. On the other hand, when we realize the limitation of thinking, that's why sometimes imagination and expansion allows us to become closer to understanding the depth of reality, which is beyond just individual thinking. So,
Yes. Now, consider that even while we're expanding our thinking, reality has never been limited. So we've been thinking our thinking was the producer of reality so long, we think we need to expand our thinking before reality expands, rather than just notice that we're actually just beginning to expand expansion can go on forever. Contraction eventually can't go any further. At some point, contraction just becomes such a minimal point that there's nowhere to go. So if in fact we're dealing with something infinite, expansion would be more aligned with that infinite source. So growth is talked about in the book, progress rather than perfection. Growing along spiritual lines. If I'm growing along spiritual lines, I'm simultaneously admitting that I have narrow lines that I'm growing along, thought lines that I've created, limits that I'm thinking. And all I'm doing is beginning to expand. The ultimate surrender or concession here is to realize it doesn't matter what I do with thinking, it has no impact on reality whatsoever. It has an incredible impact on the effects I face and the circumstances and situations I face, and on my interreactions and interactions with people. Dramatic impact. Because while all of that essence is true, and it's at peace and it's whole and it's knowing, it doesn't mean I'm expressing it as a human. It doesn't mean I'm behaving in alignment with it, as you mentioned. It simply means it's my source. And when I think of it wrong, I am bound to disconnect and feel incapacitated and diminish my capacity immediately. Just like if I were a dam and I thought the best thing I could do was never let the water out, I'd really be doing my job because I'm never letting the water out. And eventually the water is going to come over and destroy the whole dam. So whether I'm a channel of it effectively and efficiently is the difference between me considering it actually rather than fantastically, rather than using imagination to. Imagination is really designed to help us begin to realize the capacity we have to solve problems that would benefit everyone, not subject anyone to a ramification that would be diminished in any regard. That, I would say, is the ultimate channeling of that knowingness, that lovingness, that ultimate source. So we're free, as you're talking about determinism and all that, we're given the freedom to choose whatever we want. And to choose the worst thing is the only thing probably isn't the best thing we could do. Just a thought. There may be another option here. And the addictive nature of this thinking, my experiences has not been spoken. I read a lot about history and a lot about philosophy, all kinds of things, trying to figure all this stuff out. And they never talked about addiction as being the core of the mental problem. It was always some haunting, exterior, impossible thing that seemed to be this shadow life that we were leading, this darkness that that nobody can, there's this thing in the universe, everything to incapacitate the fact that an individual could sit in their own seat and say, oh, it's what I'm doing with what I'm thinking. When I think what I'm doing is right, when it's wrong. Boom. And now, since we each can think for our seeming self, when we're really just thinking for our thinking, and now we're thinking for the body we have, we're starting to say, oh, I've got a body, I'm responsible. So maybe if I'm actually acting in accordance with reality, certainly wouldn't stress my body and undermine its ability to function. All of my metabolic and parasympathetic and cardiovascular systems would start functioning without stress. That would be an improvement. And now I can start acting in ways that are improved because I'm not walking out the door in the morning feeling like hell, wondering how I'm going to get better, and causing hell to prove it's the only thing I can do.
Jack,
lenses.
Everything you are saying is impacting my brain, because I remember having experiences. I remember it's like, oh my God, I had this experience. I did this or I do that. It's interesting.
And
Wow.
what's interesting too, Lens, is when it's looked at accurately, it becomes funny. But when it's looked at as something we can't do anything about, it's incredibly depressing and demeaning and degrading.
Exactly.
And loathsome. And to walk around having those thoughts about our own experience as who we are is to not be very good at having a relationship with anything at all, because we are trying desperately to hide this secret that is not a secret at all. Because if you look at people, you can see the way they're walking, the way their posture is, the words they use, the inability to consider anything, the reactive nature of being immediately, if you want to move your car in the direction of their lane and they're dead set on going, they're honking and it's a fight. It's not a convergence of traffic. It's just this reactive, volatile, hostile, explosive environment.
Yeah.
And to think we have nothing to do with it is to think that that environment is natural and human nature and all of that. And that is just another extension of the lie. It's not human nature at all. It's the nature of thinking defectively as reality that comes with that nature. And those things you can always expect if you do the things to cause them. And there's some reassurance. What's nice is I know that when I'm lying about something, I'm always going to feel less than. So when I began to realize this, I began to realize that whenever I feel less than, I'm lying about something. Because we think of opposites as something that are separate. I can take this position and be good all the time, meaning I'm never bad. In fact, when I'm good, it's because I'm not being bad. It's a scale of things that are connected. When I started seeing that, I started realizing I was being given an experience that was accurate for what was happening, but I was listening to it with ears of an addict, thinking, I got to escape this and get away from it. And what do? I don't listen. I think that what's happening that's wrong in my thinking, I feel wrong. So I think what I need to do is get away from this feeling. I got to escape it. And where does it go? Everywhere I take it, it goes with me. Everywhere.
Exactly. Yes.
And then it feels impossible to get away from. And it is, because I'm taking it with me as I go. And the idea that I need to kill myself to get beyond that shows how committed we are to thinking that this is the only way we can think, and it's the nature of thinking, and it's the nature of humanity, and we're just sots, horrible people that have no better potential. It's absolutely not true. It's never been true because it isn't true, and it never will be true because it isn't true. It's simply a thought about a thought. That isn't the world. That isn't, well, I can call it my world. But if that's the world I'm living in, it's pretty small even compared to this world.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Wow.
So sitting with it and actually contemplate, what happened for me is believe it or not, I got quieter. I know Les doesn't believe that at all, but I got quieter. And for a long time, I sort of thought about these things in my own experience, but I didn't share them openly because it seemed so preposterous to even mention. And then I began to realize it's preposterous not to talk about it. Why would I use that same technique of thinking I'm alone with something that's absolutely amazing and sort of startlingly free and not talk about it? So I started. And I pissed a lot of people off. I have people that don't talk to me anymore. They think I'm telling them what to do. But that's part of the process.
Exactly.
If there are landmines planted in the earth, as there are, and there have been campaigns, I forget who somebody led a huge campaign to start to unearth these landmines. If we're walking on earth that is filled with these potentials of explosion, we're going to be very, very nervous about everywhere we go. And in our own experience, this psychic issue gives us the impression that we can't take a step without worry. Because
Exactly.
anyone we run into could potentially reveal that tension. And then we've had people here over, what I realize with people is if people are telling stories and you interrupt their story, they explode. Because that story is trying to be told in a way that's as good as they've ever told it to prove that it's all they are and all that is happening. And to ripple that in any way, to interfere with that, reveals the tension, the reactiveness, the fear, the hatred, the loathing, all of those things that are in that. And so culturally, we've come up with a solution of don't interrupt people. It's not polite. That's like saying somebody's on fire, the house is on fire, and I don't want to disturb their sleep. Let's not call them. Let's not try to wake them up. I don't want to disturb their sleep. Their house is on fire.
I find a similarity to that in the meetings when newcomers try to explain and rationalize why they've done what they've done and how they do what they do. I'll laugh at them because we've all done it. And, trying to make rational out of the irrational. It's interesting that now that we're moving it from the level of a substance addiction or whatever to limited thinking, and someone has to explain the story to talk about the completeness, expansiveness, or importance or relevance of their limited thinking, and then we would either try to call them on it or laugh about it. Of course, the reaction, all we're doing is having the same reaction, saying, all right, you're getting somewhere. And if you're being disturbed because I'm talking about your limitation, it just shows that you need to expand your connection to reality.
Well, again, it's nothing they need to do, but it's certainly something they can do. Because the idea of need.
I think one of the most beautiful things about getting sober was the concept that I had utterly bashed my head against the powerlessness that I had, that my willpower wasn't sufficient, blah, blah, blah. And then somehow that was no longer the issue by grace or whatever. So I can alter and change the destiny or the path that I was going based upon that. Why can't I let go of this limited path of whatever I think is important or reality or whatever? I mean, to me, overcoming that one aspect was so much more either difficult or didn't have the, not so much the ability, just couldn't even think, find, or do a way out. Why would I, now that I've gone past that, and we're just talking about thinking or one's perception of what is happening in the world or around oneself or what's going on, why would one close off the possibility of there being another, better, different, inclusive way?
Well, and I think the reasons are as many as people who are operating on the basis as that being their only choice.
Wow.
If you're asking the question.
Just think what you said. The only choice.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it is? I mean, wait a minute.
But here's what's interesting, Les. Choice, when I started looking at principles, I began to realize that they weren't optional and they weren't negotiable. They're just they're the terms of life. It's already spelled out. Orville and Wilbur didn't discover how to fly. They discovered how to create a wing that flew within the context of aerodynamics that had always been in place within our atmosphere, within whatever billions of years it took for that to evolve, right?
Sure.
So my choice always allows not to be chosen. So think about addiction. We say, I have no other choice. There is no other choice. I had no other choice. That's a lie. We're taking principles and trying to convert them into reality in our thinking by lying about them. And choice always allows not to be chosen. When someone realizes that their choice can always be unchosen, if you give them that a little bit of information and they're stuck in something they think they have no other choice but to do, all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, if I do have another choice, see, the addiction is I have no other choice. So it just does this over and over and over and over and over, years, lifetimes, generations have been doing this. It's built into the culture in terms of the conversation. We think about this socially as real because it's become common, but it's uncommon because it's to normalize abnormality is exactly what social ills reflect. It's sick collectively.
Yeah.
And for me to think about it as something that I'm free because I've started to realize these things, or for any of us to start realizing these things, like in sobriety, realizing if we could admit the most obvious thing about alcohol, which is that I never had any control, it isn't as though something's swooping down and giving us freedom. We start to think about it correctly. And all of a sudden, that correct thinking gives us the opportunity to see that I can choose it and I can not choose it. I have no obligation to continue. Now, that's different with something tangible because humans are so used to doing things, but they're not seeing their thinking as a doing, they're seeing it as reality. So they don't think they have everything to do with everything happening because a lot of what they're doing, they don't want to admit they have anything to do with, right? So that's me too. If I begin thinking of us as a species and that we're all based on the same premise, if I'm actually identifying a problem correctly, or any of us identify a problem correctly, which has happened through history, Copernicus said, we're not at the center of the universe. All of a sudden, astronomers started realizing, oh, these orbits make sense. Everything started to make sense. Why? Because they were making nonsense out of it for years. It wasn't because the organization of the universe changed and said, well, we're going to start making sense to these people on that little planet so that they can feel better about themselves. It was always that way. So when I think I need to grow, I'm still committing to a limit. When I begin to admit that there is no limit in an absolute knowing source, and that becomes my source, I begin to realize I know everything I need to know. And the clarity is the disturbance that comes in my body when I start thinking things that are not aligned with that knowing. Exactly as the book says. Exactly. And my sense is this, Bill was onto this when he started looking at the emotional sobriety component, and he was probably a little disenchanted because he didn't end up on the cover of Time magazine again. But he planted the seed for us to come to terms with, to start to see that the book has this said in it over and over and over and over again in ways that I think he thought of in rational terms, rather than beginning to see that they are always the same. They've never been any different. And the sooner we begin to concede that to our thinking, the sooner our thinking stops trying to accomplish it and says, thanks for it, I'm grateful for it, because the fullness of that greatness becomes the channel that I'm expressing in my thinking. So I start doing things I never would have thought I could do. Because thinking wasn't designed to conclude reality, it was designed to express reality. Our bodies are expressions of reality. They are life forms. They are not the essence of life. Life is the essence of life. We have the capacity to express ourselves in ways that are helpful to everyone. So the abundance of nature, which is our nature, and I'm not just talking about the forests and the mountains and nature in terms of the human scale of nature, I'm talking about the nature of existence. To start to notice that is to completely transform, literally transform our capacity to transform things. Because we don't create reality when we change things, we simply transform them. We change existing reality in some way. And to start seeing it that way is a much more thankful approach rather than saying, look what I did. I'm the creator of it. We discovered it, we think, when scientists come up with something that's been there for 12 billion years. Say, well, we discovered it. No, we just had a thought about it that was correct finally. But if the premise of our thinking is so wrong as to not even notice what we're doing with it, we've been going off on these tangents trying to accomplish things that could be accomplished in a nanosecond with the clarity of knowing, because process of elimination would no longer be the process. It would not even be a process, because it would be an innate knowing, not inane knowing, innate knowing, intuition, absolute knowing. If we know it and we start from that point of view, in our human experience, our thinking is off the hook. It's not condemned by any requirement we need to accomplish anything. It finally is saying, oh, I've been doing a lot of things that are interfering with my potential to express that knowing nature. And I've known it all along because I've been conflicted, and I've been in emotional turmoil, and I've had mental anguish, and I've been at odds with other people, and I held them in low self-esteem. I thought of them as worse than they are, when all I was thinking was worse thoughts about them. And start to really track back the responsibility that we each have 100% for all of society, all of history, all of the potential for the future. It's all occupying the current present state we're in. It doesn't exist anywhere else, never has. We're the sum total of everything that's ever happened. So if we could do anything right now, we do everything right in relation to everything that's ever happened, and as a result, everything that can happen. Seems like a big deal. It's not infinite, is not infinite to infinite, just the way it is. Doesn't think about it and says, look at me, I'm a big deal. It just is. Simple. The universe isn't big. In the concept of an infinite, the universe is a speck of dust. It's tiny. For us to think of us as tiny relative to the universe and not recognize we're absolutely woven into the universe is to again subject ourselves to the process of rational thinking about us in terms of size and shape, rather than in terms of infinite absolute knowing awareness. Certainly a possibility. It is not the only possibility, because all things that are possible are possible. To think that impossibility is the only possibility would clearly be lacking in the potential of human endeavor. And we've been good at it for a long time. And my sense socially is just like we've been socially inept, just like we were individually inept when it came to alcoholism. Since we haven't talked about this openly, we haven't talked about sanity sanely, we haven't talked about the mentality that's creating the insanity, the self-induced insanity, the self that seems to be existing to even induce it. We've been operating on a premise that's completely not right, and doing a lot of wrong in the name of thinking it's right. And it's as obvious as ever today, because today is the accumulation of all that wrong. And it's a cry for help within society, just like it's a cry for help for every person who's struggling on the street, that we think we have nothing that we can offer them. And today we have more people living on the street, more suicides than ever, more addiction than ever. It's everywhere, all over the place. And we don't seem to know what to do about it. So what do? Build them condos, try to hide them in a new place, so they're not in our view. Why? Because we're sick about it. Because it's our sickness that is actually perpetuating. It's not them, it's us, each of us, all of us, thinking in this way. Those problems aren't problems accidentally. They're actually crying for attention, to see what we're doing individually and thus collectively.
Jack, I want to say something very interesting. I admire men, human beings who conquer addictions, any type of addiction, or adversity in life. And that is why I'm here in this meeting, Jack. I want to do this to all of you, to win addictions or anything, and we are living this awakening. This is amazing. Jack, I was married when I was 22. I dreamed to have a family. My ex-husband, he was alcoholic. This is very interesting, emotional to me, because you are talking about something that I wanted to have more than 10 years ago. That is why I respect you so much. He made a lot of mistakes because he he thought was wrong. So he faced prison. So I was by myself with my daughter. So
What did you say?
today is,
He went to prison?
yeah,
Yeah.
he was an alcoholic and he faced prison. Imagine, I had no clue about life. I was, oh my gosh, by myself, no English. I didn't, I was, I don't know. It was very hard for me. But when I'm listening to you this today, I was like, wow, I know we are missing people here. And I wish to have those people that are missing today in this beautiful meeting, because you are telling us the power, the root of the problem, and how to fix us first, and then to have a nice and safe society. Because everything starts with us. We are thinking, and are thinking to create the good or not good experiences. This is amazing. It's like, wow.
So let me hit on a point you're making, because my sense is, as we cross to begin to see this, obviously, is to begin to see that something's going on that may not be right.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's so common that we think of it as normal again when it's abnormal and it's really uncommon. But the insistence of maintaining it is the persistence of the problem. That's what we each do. So when you're talking about conquering addiction,
Yes.
addiction is trying to conquer reality. So we're not trying to conquer addiction. We're trying to notice that there is no possibility of conquering reality, because reality is already reality and it's not fighting for itself at all. It doesn't oppose us when we decide to do that. But all of the functional interaction we're having with reality clearly indicates that something's wrong with what we're doing, because it's like we keep not making the right wing and we're jumping off of a building hoping to fly. And every time we crash, those would be lousy results, bad results. So part of this problem is starting to see that we're already intact. We've always been intact. We've been acting like we're not because we've been thinking reality is our thoughts. Mm-hmm. So here's something we do, all of a sudden becoming who we are. Well, who were we when we didn't think? We must not have been anybody. So at 1 year old born, we were nobody until we started thinking rationally. That alone is sort of preposterous, because babies are very perceptive. They know when their diaper needs to be changed. Somehow they get attention.
Yes.
But this hyper attention of thinking about thinking has distracted us from the social ramifications that we're all sharing, and given us the impression that the best I can do is feel better in my own little world and do things that I really love. And I would suggest most of those things are compulsions of a new sort that just feel better because we're basically trying to serve the self and satisfy this self that will never be satisfied because it has no basis in reality whatsoever. We're already fulfilled. We're already complete. We're already whole. We know it, and that's why we're embarrassed about acting like we don't. We know it so well that all of those things we do are cries for help because we don't know how to say it. We haven't been good. We're saying it through all of the problems, but we're not addressing it verbally and saying, these are the problems that come with that kind of thinking naturally. Crime, the idea that we need somebody else's stuff. We've got to take everything from everyone else because there isn't enough for me. Well, I'm only thinking about a me that isn't enough for anybody, because there isn't anything there other than my thinking of itself, having been mistakenly created as an identity of myself, who I am. It's not true.
You know what is interesting? After my ex faced that situation, he changed completely. He never get alcohol anymore, and he's doing very, very well. But we had to face this experience more than 10 years ago, and I was very young. Oh my gosh, facing that. So when I see you, Jack, when you speak and you are talking about wisdom and all that kind of secrets in life, it's like, wow, for me, because I can identify that you are telling us oh my gosh,
But
this
you know
is
what you're really identifying, Lenses, is
mm,
that you know that you know.
mhm,
It's not me. It isn't me telling you. You know that you know, or you wouldn't have any appreciation for that.
mm,
But appreciation is very different than depreciation. To minimize our interest in our own doing and think we're not doing it is depreciating. We're taking value and minimizing it. We're trying literally not to exist. I don't have anything to do
mm,
with anything. Think about that sentence. I don't have anything to do with it. We're claiming not to be a part of any of it. To say that,
uh-huh,
it's very common. If you listen to the words, the insanity starts to become a lot clearer.
mm,
The other side of this, starting to see this, is not to be joyful all the time. My experience was I thought that enlightenment in this regard, this sort of brilliant radiance, is all consuming and completely our nature. That to begin to witness that would make everything fun. And the clarity is it isn't all fun. It isn't all
mm,
happy. It isn't all good. And it's
mhm,
starting to see that what's happening beyond the scope of this previously limited idea I had about everything is starting to look at everything accurately and saying, you know what? There is a lot of wrong going on.
mhm.
And for me to think about it as something I have nothing to do with is to help promote the wrong continuing, just like I did in my own
Exactly.
experience. So to see it from the broader view, now think socially of what we do. You had mentioned that your husband went to prison. What
Yeah.
we've done with people on the street is given them more latitude and less consequence.
Mm,
So if consequence actually helps us come to terms with the accountability we have for what we've done, giving people more latitude doesn't help them at all. It actually helps them
mhm,
get worse. We've had in our city, Los Angeles, we've had more people dying on the
mhm,
street than ever before.
mhm,
And what's the contention? What we need to do is spend billions more dollars on housing. The problem is
mhm,
housing. It's not a mental problem. It isn't a social problem. It's housing. So
mm,
all these new rules have come in. They're all of a sudden expediting the building of low-income housing when a person who's been trying to build housing in the city has been suffering from a process that is so complicated and so difficult that many people just give up. And all that housing
mhm.
we could have had over the last 30 or 40 years hasn't been there because of these restrictions that are all of a sudden now lifted because we need them. We need the housing. Like, no kidding. We've needed it all along. We're just not thinking correctly and healthy as a society.
Mm. Thank you for talking about all this kind of stuff, Jack. Thank
Oh.
you.
Well,
Oh my gosh.
listen, you are witness. To recognize it, Lensis, is to admit you know it. And to start seeing that will give you a voice to begin to add to the insight that others may be lacking in their own awareness by their participation at a level that's well beneath their potential and their capacity. So ultimately, that's what this conversation is about. And I would say today, in the years we've done this, is probably a transition and starting to say that if we have this knowing nature and if we're keeping it to ourselves and thinking there's a self to keep it to on top of it, then we're not doing what we can to actually have the world in the way that it is, and as a result, affect it in a way that could be, which is positively. In not just positive against negative, but noticing that positive is typically, negative is basically trying to negate positive.
Mhm,
Positive is typically something that can happen, something that's useful, something that's whole, something that is valuable, that benefits not just me, but everybody. If
yes.
I am successful enough in my own experience to take care of my needs, I do not become a burden to everyone else. That's a stepping stone in the direction of starting to say, well, if I can
Mhm,
operate on a basis to satisfy my own needs and help everyone as a result, what happens when I start operating on a capacity where I can go well beyond my needs? Now I can really start to focus on everyone else because I'm not
exactly.
struggling with real need. I'm starting to realize that I'm just expressing the ultimate absolute nature of an unlimited capacity.
Exactly.
And my sense is it starts mentally. Every choice
Yes.
we make starts with a thought. Every
Exactly.
action we take voluntarily starts with a thought.
Exactly. You are 100% true. Yeah. So wow. Wow. Very interesting.
Yeah. Interest tends to be the dividend of good investments.
Yes.
And so if we've been interested in trying to solve a problem, we're making a bad investment and it keeps getting worse because we haven't admitted we're creating the problem and trying to solve it at the same time. Mentally, within our own experience, we're the masters of it and the slaves to it in our own experience. Doesn't make any sense. It's certainly a possibility because it's possible to do that, but it isn't a possibility in reality because it's only happening in our mentality. Lies only exist in the brains of humans. Animals don't take on different personas and personalities and pretend. Cheetahs don't try to be bears. Humans do that. Lies only exist in our thinking. And they're only maintained by the idea that they're true. A lie that's a lie is actually true because it no longer has any power because it's been admitted to be what it is. There's no conflict there. So to start seeing this conflict is also to see that we've been imposters by thinking who we are is what we think rather than who we actually are.
Yes.
And start to see that embarrassed self-consciousness is defined as undue regard for appearance. Why would a self that's conscious be worried about how it looks? But the problem is with appearance, it's all about appearance and not substance, because there is no substance in that self-conscious. There's no substance in self-conscious. Look in the dictionary. I did it the other day. There was probably 200 entries of words that are redefined connected to self. Self-abuse, self-help, self-empowerment, self-this, self-that, self-that, as though those words take on a whole new meaning when we attach them to this thing we call ourself. Who we are is not in question. Who we think we are is only in question because it's full of doubt and uncertainty because it doesn't exist. It's simply thinking about thinking itself, having been converted into my thinking, I'm thinking about myself. We're not. We're thinking about our thinking. We've taken the most important thing we have to make choices that have moral, virtuous ground under them, substantive, absolute life's terms, and turned them into something that we think is each of our own and identifies us. And my word is my bond and all that kind of stuff. We're already bonded. We're already bonded. We're already, our words express our thinking.
I like when I notice, for example, I like to have that kind of thing. Like I know who I am. Like I like pink. I like white, and I like this. So I told myself I know who I am because I like these things, and I don't like these things because these things that make me feel so comfortable. So that is the way that I know who I am, because I know my limits, my boundaries, the color that I like.
Well,
with lenses.
Consider though that the like and dislike is the human thinking process, and that love that doesn't like or dislike, love doesn't like or dislike, love isn't in that rational thinking. So who you are as a human is in those realms and that limit. So you can talk about those things as being unique to you because you can like or not like whatever you do. You're free to. What I learned was that I thought my likes and dislikes defined me, but when I started noticing that I really liked what I didn't like, and I didn't like what I liked at times, it started to make it a little bit more difficult to try to identify those things as clear. And I started eating vanilla, for instance. I always loved chocolate. I started eating, and I thought vanilla is very good. Actually, when I didn't have this whole mental thing, I thought, oh no, vanilla, but it's not chocolate. It's just vanilla. So the black and white started to diminish. So we're free, but we're also free to change the thoughts we have about the things we like and don't like. Because in my experience, my thoughts and dislikes had to do with trying to perfect the self I thought I was and trying to give people a roadmap of what to stay away from, because I know that if they got too close, it would begin to reveal the defensive, reactive fear that I had about being found out for thinking I'm those things. rather than thinking I can freely choose whatever I want anytime. I'm not defined by those things until I think they're real, and I think there's nothing I can do about them, and I think that I'm clear about them. And really what I'm getting clear about is making believe that my thinking is in fact now my reality. When it's always fluid, it's always, if we can not choose what we're choosing, that means we can choose anything in between what we choose and what we don't choose. Everything, all the time. Much different way of looking at it when it becomes free rather than something that has to be condensed and compacted and separated and conformed, all that kind of stuff. And most relationships are based on, don't get too close to this part of me, because if you do, I will no longer like you. So my sense is we do not struggle with love, we struggle with like and dislike in relationships.
Good. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Good. You know what? I learned that with, and you know, I learned that from my past chapter. I learned that. Yes. It's
From
true.
your past
Relationship.
Oh,
Yes.
I thought you said shopping.
No. Chapter. Capítulo. Yeah. Yes. It's like that. Like
Terry, where are you from?
Oh, Peru.
Peru. So Lensis is in Argentina, or from Argentina. She's in your neighborhood.
Oh,
No. Hola.
oh, that's great. Yeah.
So, Jack, to finalize or summarize, it's been quite refreshing and amazing to see lenses come out and express these thoughts and feelings. And I think it's sort of that clear, it's nice and amazing to see someone come to the knowing awareness that we've been talking about. But now lenses, we have to spread it throughout the world just by practicing these principles in our daily lives of your knowing awareness, that the happiness, the joy that you just talked about, in relating to other people and in our practices and professions, and one step at a time, I guess, is what I'm getting at, Jack, of just interacting with people beyond this meeting is my goal. It's sort of my I don't know how to put it, I guess, but you know.
If we spend 2 hours a day in this meeting discussing this in this way, we have 166 other hours every week in between to practice and to express. But one thing in relation to that, Gabe, is to begin to notice that we're already affecting everyone everywhere with what we do. So to think we have no influence is to try to deny the lack of influence, or the influence that we've had that hasn't been good, that's been helping influence people to continue doing what they're doing and the way they've been doing it, saying, well, you're going to be fine, rather than you're fine now. Coming to terms with it is starting to see that while we think of it as a process, it ultimately, in the absolute nature of nature, isn't a process at all. It's already resolved. It's already complete. It's already whole. It's already everything. And this experience we're having is a possibility of that ultimate basis of existence. And even using the word basis would suggest that it has ground under it, as though it's similar to our earthly experience, when in fact there's no space, there's no time, there's no dimension, there's no capacity for any quantitative analysis whatsoever in that knowingness, because it's complete, it's whole. It's not a process of getting somewhere. It's a being of everywhere, of everything, simultaneous in the present now. So my sense is the real accountability starts to become, what I realized is that for all I've ever realized, I've had very little influence in a direction that I would prefer having. And I had great influence in directions that I would rather not admit having. And so that embarrassment starts to boil off a little bit by talking about it, because people can understand that, because my experience has been that people are typically suffering from the things they're trying to hide when in fact they're not hiding them at all, because it's being expressed in their own inefficiencies and their own inequities and their own conflicts and their own deficiencies. All of those things are examples of that thinking that are giving us information, textbook information, curriculum to address what we think we're not doing while it's in our face and we act like we can't even see it, can't notice it, and there's nothing there to see because we don't think we have anything to do with it. How convenient. It's not true. It's never going to be true. And to begin to look at it honestly is to begin to come to terms with. I had a panic attack when this really hit me. And when you started to get emotional, lenses, simultaneously, people talk about Zoom not being able to convey and it's not in person. I felt it coming. I sensed it, and I started to get tears in my eyes.
So did I.
Did you?
We know. We all have this knowing awareness, and
Yes.
to see someone blossom into it is amazing. Having gone through the experience myself, and it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, and the experience is now, and the question is how committed am I to thinking I've already done it, and not thinking I'm either acting on it or not acting on it right now. Starting to really come to terms with the fact that the only thing that's ever happened in the universe has always happened in the present. It's never happened in the past. It's never happened in the future. Those are concepts of thought, by the way. Animals don't tend to dread their past. They don't tend to go to therapy to overcome their past. They're not thinking about the past. They're thinking about the presently. They may learn, but the learning is the collection of everything they've come to terms with in the present. So it's not to suggest we can't think about those things, but that when we're thinking about those things, we're only thinking about those things. Those things don't otherwise have any place in reality. I mean, if they do have a place in reality, they would also be present in the moment. So the accumulation of everything that's happened in terms of the process is always present where we are in total. So if there's anything to learn about anything, it's not somewhere else with someone else at some other time and place. It's now, it's here. And the beginning to account for it is to say, well, maybe I should just listen. If I'm the observer, actually look at the feelings I'm having and look at the thoughts I'm having and seeing that they're actually very much intimately same coin, different sides I'm looking at. I'm being given perspective. Valuable. Say if I'm thinking I feel wrong, think about that. To even say that we feel wrong, we have to think about the word to quantify it. So our thinking and our feeling is working together, because feelings don't think, and language is born in thinking. But feelings know, they have an awareness. And what's the awareness? What the thinker thinks. They're together. So if I'm thinking about those things as things I'm doing, and start saying, wow, this is actually good information. And rather than try to stop it and get away from it, start to just live with it and say, wow, this is actually giving me an awareness of something I don't even think I'm doing. Maybe the longer I sit with it, the discomfort of it, the knowing that I'm doing something wrong that I've always thought I should not be doing, so I've always denied doing, all of a sudden becomes that charge of energy starts to release an information as we're willing to warm up to it. Just like sitting with a child who's gotten into trouble, and they probably don't need to be told any more about what's wrong, but just put your arm around them and sit with them for 10 minutes. And some of those experiences for kids are some of the most profound things that ever happen, because everybody seems so busy on telling, especially kids, what's wrong, what they're doing wrong, etc. And trust me, there's plenty wrong to be mentioning. Doesn't mean it's the only thing we can do. When we're doing this in our own experience, we're bullying ourselves, we're fighting ourselves, we're condemning ourselves. And the self we're condemning isn't even who we are, it's the imagination of who we think we are. And to imagine that that's who we are is just another fallacy and another mistake. And it's not to say we can't think it up. But when we think it up freely, that self will be a much different experience than the one we have when we think we have to fight it all the time and we're always condemned by it. It's never enough, and all those other things will not be the case, because we'll actually be expressing the knowing nature of our existence in our human experience. And that fulfillment can't be any less than everything. So it can't be depreciated. It can't be less than. It can't be contemptible. It can't be condemned. That infinite source is not a choice, it's not a negotiation, and yet because it's not a choice, it doesn't condemn us to anything, because we have been given everything already. that's like, if that's the case, then I got some practice in terms of how I operate on that basis to begin to not allow not so much not allow circumstances to impinge on me, but notice how much circumstance seems to mean to me in terms of the implied threat, in terms of the ideas I had about how things should be going in relation to those weak ideas I have about how I'm going to survive, how I'm going to get by, how I'm going to fix these problems. Because now I'm not, if I'm not isolated in my thinking all I'm thinking about is my thinking, I'm starting to notice there's a lot more evidence to what I've been doing out there that I haven't been paying any attention to. No wonder it keeps getting worse. No wonder I keep getting less back. And that's because that, to me, is what you're describing, Gabe, is starting to practice this. It's the practice is actually, and the point I was starting to make earlier, Lens, is about not trying to conquer it. Conquering is another fight. This isn't a fight at all, because there is no fight in reality and truth, because there are no parts and pieces to conflict. It's the beginning of seeing that it's the undoing of what I've been redoing, rather than thinking I need to be some new force to come in and take it over, which just reinforces this idea that everything's a fight, everything's in conflict. It's the only way it is. It's always going to be that way. And yet I'm constantly in stress and anxiety, undermining my capacity to function as a human. And all of my bodily systems are being eroded in their capacity to do what they're designed to do, by the way, without me even thinking. Think of how many trillions of chemical reactions our bodies are going through on a daily basis. And we don't think about it. And yet how we think undermines that potential of those things to work in our favor. We undermine all of them without having to think about any of them. Another example of the fact that a knowing awareness is not too far-fetched to imagine absolutely is the basis of existence and our existence as humans and beings.
Jack, how can I identify when somebody like you or somebody here in the meeting I use that conquer win any addiction or anything dramatic in their life? How can I identify when somebody like you can see their life now is better than before? How can I identify that person? I use the word conquistó in español, but how can I identify that?
My experience is the identification is in our own experience. And generally, when I think of other people in ways that have me think of them in contemptful ways or in spiteful ways, or think that they're wrong, if I've identified that, I've really identified the thinking I'm still doing that's wrong. And so there's two ways I can come out of that relationship. Generally speaking, it's either fuck you, because I think they're doing it to me, or it's thank you, because they're giving me an opportunity to see something I wouldn't otherwise be looking at.
For example, I admire you because you have this medal, this experience of ¿cómo se dice? Conquistando, that you win addiction. To me, that is so amazing. When I saw a person who had a kind of history and experience, and they can talk about their own experiences and say, you know what, I was done with alcohol, or I was done with drugs, or I was done with porn, I was done with any type of addiction. And you can sit here with us and just share this amazing wisdom that you have, that, oh my God, impact my brain so much because I had experienced it. And it's like, wow, he is telling us exactly the way how to conquer. It's so
now think of what you're conquering as surrender, which is a very essential part of sobriety. It's not trying to fight, because if I fight it, I perpetuate it, because I think there's something to fight. When I surrender, I'm really surrendering the idea that there's nothing there to fight at all. All I've been fighting is the thought I had that there was something there to fight. So the mental aspect of recovery, the addiction hasn't ended. it's only become clear that it wasn't in the alcohol. Even within the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says that the alcohol is a symptom and the bottle is a symbol of an underlying problem. What's underlying? The things I think I'm not doing, the things I'm thinking to my seeming self that are all I can do because there's nothing else I can do. And now I've become judge, jury, and executioner of my own experience. I didn't even have to end up in court to feel as though I'm condemned to death. And really what I'm afraid of is being condemned to the life that just doesn't seem to let me go, that seems to constantly have me in conflict, that seems to have me so hateful and loathsome in my own experience that I don't even think there's any value in continuing to live. So the real addiction here is starting to see that it's this thing that we're capable of creating within our thinking when we think our thinking is reality, because clearly thinking is fundamental to human experience. We don't do anything voluntarily without a thought. So that means everything we do starts with a thought. If the thought's contaminated, the actions are going to be contaminated, and I'm going to be embarrassed about those actions. So starting to see that now again isn't a fight, because if I fight it, I'm trying to feel better than it and I'm trying to get over it. What am I doing? Maintaining it, as though there's something to maintain again. It's the surrender that there's never been anything there that wasn't imagined to be real, ever. It's never been there. It's been a delusion. It's been an idea that an illusion was truth and reality, which is delusional. It's an insane idea. And insanity is basically defined as seeing and hearing things that don't exist. And think of this. If I'm talking to myself, doesn't that define that same insanity? I'm talking to a self that doesn't exist, thinking I'm having a conversation. To be talking to myself means there's two people inside of me. That's bipolar, schizophrenia, manic depressive, etc. I'm trying to win an argument that I'm creating and then wondering why I can't stop it, because I think it's mandatory to save the life of the thought I have when that thought has no life whatsoever, because it's wholly imagined.
Wow.
So my experience is we're not afraid of dying. Everybody, 120 billion people have died so far. Nobody failed. Nobody failed. They all did it perfectly. We're not afraid of dying. We're afraid of living, because living would actually reveal the disastrous presumption we've had about who we are, and as a result, all we are as a society and all we're capable of as a species. And to face that is monumental compared to the monument we've been trying to erect in the name of thinking who we are as all the things we have and all the things we've done. Starting to see that we've all been participants in this deception for as long as we've been thinking those things to ourselves. We've been imposing those things on each other. And an imposition is an imposter. It becomes depressing the more and more and more and more and more I continue to make believe and resist the idea that what I'm thinking isn't true. I create pressure in my system because I manifest effects that actually feel real, because I'm actually dreaming. Same thing in a dream. I have these nightmares. Think about how many nightmares include running down a hallway, trying to get away from something you can't get away from. Think of that. It's very interesting. We're trying while we're awake to get away from the same thing and keep not actually succeeding, which is very depressing. And we think the satisfaction of the depression is to take drugs to feel better about it, rather than say, wait a minute, you're inducing a state of insanity within your own thinking. You're doing it, you're causing it, you're suffering the effect of it. To think of the effect as the only thing that you're doing is to continue to manage the cause of it as though you're not doing it. That's insanity again, all over again. And that's how we deal with it socially. Now, I'm not a doctor. I'm not prescribing this for anybody, but I'm suggesting that if it's self-induced, the self that's inducing it doesn't even exist. It's a concept we've come up with, just like a lie doesn't have any basis in existence. It only exists in the thought that something's true that isn't true. It's the same thing. We are not good liars because it decapitates and diminishes and depreciates our functional capacity to produce and to provide and to protect in any way that we would be survival oriented. And within our families, those seem to be seen as central components But within the family of man, it's been overlooked as being something that we're actually all doing. We're causing the threats to the family to give us the impression that we need to produce, provide, and protect for the family, rather than begin to realize that it's the family of humans that are actually prescribed to do that for all of us, where there wouldn't be any threats, where there wouldn't be a diminished capacity. When I'm the biggest threat I have in terms of the thinking I'm doing about the I think I am, that doesn't allow me a lot of clarity in seeing anything else beyond me in any other way than backward, completely disformed, out of character, out of sized, outsized, undersized, minimized, maximized, grandiose, self-pitiful. All those things become natural because I'm trying to get the pendulum to swing in the right direction constantly, but it keeps swinging in the other direction, regardless of what I do in that regard.
Wow.
So talking about it here is a chance to practice what we're capable of doing out there. And it doesn't mean you have to. It doesn't mean you should. It simply means you can. And why can you? Because it's possible. And the reality of life is all possibility. It's been possible the whole time. We've just been trying to make believe impossibility is our nature, and we're trying to overcome it, which if impossibility is impossible, it's never going to be possible. That's the whole point of impossibility.
Wow. Thank you for having this meeting, Jack.
You're welcome.
It's the only thing that I can say. It's beautiful.
I can assure you that I couldn't have it if you didn't come. So I want you to see the equality of this and the lack of discrimination and the potential for us to all see that we already share something that is equitable and indivisible, undividable, inviolable, something that can't be denied. We can think we're denying it, but it doesn't deny it. Start to see that this is a thing that is absolutely the nature of nature, and it is our nature.
Exactly. So beautiful. And it's love. We have the energy of love here right now. So beautiful.
Well, everywhere.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and we're sharing that now with everyone else, everywhere else, and everything else. And everything beyond the things we think don't even exist. Or the maximum amount of imagination we have, everything that might be beyond that is also included in that, regardless of whether we think there's limits. It's already inclusive. It's already present. It's always, always, always. Omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence is an all-knowing, always present. It isn't something that comes and goes. It's not something here and not there. It's here. There is no not there. There and then are concepts of thought. Here is a present state of being. And within a being state, it isn't here because there is no space. There is no time. It's just an essence of essence. Pure consciousness.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I feel just sensitive. I know I'm crying and I don't know why.
I'll share my experience, Lenses. When I started feeling this, the ice that I had used to numb my experience started to melt. And I started to notice that my tears were salty, as though I was an iceberg from the ocean, finally melting. And what's interesting about an iceberg is that an iceberg is always 5'6" underwater that can't be seen with a little bit on the top. And isn't that exactly the way I'd been living? Being numb, thinking because I was numb, those things I was numb to weren't happening. When in fact, what I was doing was learn to becoming more and more numb, more and more desensitized, more and more seemingly separate, more and more apart, and wondering why I felt alone.
Wow.
And I still have those feelings because I am still maintaining thoughts to the degree that I don't look out on the world and see this as something so common to know that it's absolutely the birthright of birth, life, reality, truth, essence.
Yeah.
To any degree that I don't see it that way, I'm actually faltering in the thinking about it rather than seeing it that way and then recognizing I'm certainly having limited thoughts in relation to it. Very much different experience than thinking how I'm seeing it's how it is. So that transition is really, in my experience, the initial practice. Where it goes from there will be up to each of us, and it will be in ways that I imagine would be inexplicable right now, because it won't be things we think about. We'll just be doing things and say, I can't believe that just happened. And then show how weak belief is to have something happen and then claim that we can't even believe it.
Yes.
So
Wow.
I appreciate this. I appreciate also that considering these ideas is really a contemplative meditation.
Uh-huh.
So I know at times there's really, I had a friend of mine who was struggling after a divorce, and she came and she said, I was really struggling and I just didn't seem to know what to say.
Mm.
And I said, there was nothing left to say.
Oh.
There was nothing you could, that way I said, think of that not as a condemnation, and that's the point, you should have said the right thing. Start to see that there was nothing to say, and you knew it. You were aware of it. And the silence very often is more healing than the more speaking about it, the trying to fix it, the trying to make it right, the trying to prove, the trying to convince.
Mm-hmm.
Silence is the nature of that still peaceful, absolute state. So if we know perfect peace, we're like a lake and somebody throws a pebble, it's going to send ripples to both ends of that lake. They may be slight, but they're noticeable. We're the ones causing the ripples because we have an absolute state of being that we know. So practicing this is beginning to talk about it, but also beginning to embrace failure, because I have never learned from anything I did right. I only seem to learn when I do it wrong. And so I launch in directions very often knowing, you know what, I'm going to say the exact wrong thing. I can tell it's coming, but I don't stop it. I don't try to stop it. I just say it. And often what's interesting is the thing I think people would dread hearing, they often laugh at because it's so absurd and so crazy, but it isn't coming in some attempt to prove it's real. It's just being expressed as a thought, and it's funny because it's unmasked as having no basis. It's really comedy at its best, which is what comedy and drama is about.
Yeah.
Drama is just taking comedy seriously. When we think who we are is what we think, we take ourselves so seriously as to think nothing's funny about that self, because there is nothing funny in it. It is a loathsome, hateful, slothful. All the things that we would consider the deadly sins are contained in that.
Yeah.
And the bedevilments, all of them. So anyway, I appreciate you all very, very much. I appreciate participating in this conversation greatly.
Thank you, Jack.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And we can all each continue anytime you want. Anyone out there is also welcome to either join us on Sunday mornings, is when we're doing it right now. Talk directly with me. Anyone else who's here, I obviously know how to get a hold of them. If you're interested in talking further with any of them, if all you guys are interested in that, just let people know that you have access to practice. And I know that practice is accessible every day, but coming to terms with this can be a little bit awkward at first. And my experience has been doing it with people that had a little experience at it, gave me a lot greater legs to exercise than people who have none. And yet, since we all know better, sometimes the people I least expect to get it pop open and just start emoting. Literally, the emotions start to flow. And a lot of those emotions have been held still a long time, thinking that they were something to protect against. So, and we witnessed that today, and I appreciate that a lot.
Well, isn't that what this is called? You talked about emotional sobriety. Lensis, I want to thank you for being emotional as compared to someone like me who's tried to be intellectual and missed the whole purpose of it. So that was great. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you, Jack.
I feel it. I just feel it because I want to say what I'm noticing. Like, man, I admire humans who have that kind of knowledge and wisdom, and it's beautiful to be here for me because I don't know, it's beautiful. It's just amazing to share as human and to have this respect and love and sharing with no condemnation. It's so amazing, and I learned so much from Jack. He was there when I needed him, and he always, hugged me. It's beautiful.
I appreciate having any value to offer anyone. And I lived many years not having much to offer and wondering why nobody appreciated my lack of having anything to offer. And now I see that lack of appreciation was in fact the absolute correct response. So I love you
Yeah,
guys.
of course. Yeah, I really
Thank you,
appreciate
Jack.
it too, Jack. Yeah, thank you for
Thank
everything,
you.
Jack.
It's Jack. Good
Yeah.
to see everyone.
Yeah,
See you later.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Jack.
Thank you.
Love you, Jack.
You
Love
too,
you,
Lindsay.
everyone. Thank you, Jack.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you.
I see you next time.
Okay.